91. Okay, thank you. I want everyone to be able to get there.
Okay, cool.
Okay, Joe, we're
And
ready.
thank you. So some of the stuff, I'll guide you over to that too, but page 67 of the report we produced is actually where the relevant portion of the law is. And so that might be how I'm going to include it in the presentation as well, but it's also good context to have. So maybe if you had that able to quickly flip there, that might be
Right.
beneficial,
So,
but go
Joe,
ahead.
just to give you a little warning. So since we're on Zoom, it's always a little awkward with our materials that we have,
Sure,
or because it's like we have our computers and we have it downloaded on our
sure.
computers or tablet or something. But just to let you know, one of the main issues is that the agenda packet. So this was your presentation was included, your report in our agenda
Okay.
packet. So your like title page for us is actually page 91 of
Ah,
our
gotcha.
agenda packet.
Okay.
So just we might be a little slow when you're directing us to
No
pages.
problem.
And
Okay.
okay, and I want to give the commission permission. At this point, I just said we're going to be in board parliamentary procedure, but this is the one exception. Whoever finds the page first can shout it out to everyone else. Okay, just like let that be known. Okay, go ahead. We're good.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Okay. Well, thank you for having us. It's been a collaborative and a productive process since I believe we started this work in October, at the end of October. So again, it's been great working with Madam Chair and Madam Director, and so happy to be here with you to discuss our recommendations and our report. So we will start with some introductions. So my name's Joe Marr. I'm one of the co-founders of Solomon Research and Analytics. So before my time with Solomon, or Bill and I both worked in charter school authorizing. So I kind of came up in charter school authorizing. I started as an analyst and then was an evaluation manager and ultimately a director of research evaluation and data analytics for a large charter school authorizer in Michigan. We started Solomon Research and Analytics, and we really help folks with exactly this type of thing, sorting through school evaluation and the law as it pertains to charter schools, as well as helping people with the reporting and the data end, and the implications of the law and the reporting requirements. So we were really excited to work with you all. I'll let my co-founder Bill Sullivan introduce himself.
Thanks, Joe. I'll be really brief so we can get to all the good stuff. But Joe and I have been working together for, I think, 10, 12 years now almost. But we met in grad school in a previous program in economics and then moved on to measurement and quantitative methods at Michigan State University. And I've done a lot of work with Joe and with the John English Center for Charter Schools in the state of Michigan, which is housed at Central Michigan University. And I've also done some work with Michigan State University and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is a mouthful, the OECD. If you're familiar with PISA, and when we find out how we rank in mathematics across the world, that's who runs that program. So I've done a lot of work around mathematics education and curriculum, and particularly in assessment and how we align what we want students to know and to learn with how we measure those things. And so we're bringing a lot of that kind of lens to part of this process, so we can look at like what your schools want to be able to teach, and then how well are we going to be able to assess that. So that's a little bit of a relevant background for us, but I'll hand it back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Bill. Um, we were curious, we talked, Madam Chair and Madam Director, about maybe getting a introduction to the commission members before we started that. Is that still okay, Madam Chair?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that is a great idea. So since Kathy and myself, we're going to go ahead and skip. So I want to
Okay.
actually start with McCall Flynn, who is the executive director of the Board of Public Education. Go ahead, McCall.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Executive Director at the Board of Public Ed. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
I
you.
love it. Okay, and I'm just going in order on my Zoom screen. Okay, you guys. So Chip, that makes you next. Give a little
Chip
background.
London. Okay, Chip Lundenlaub. I'm a retired pilot. His dad was a public school teacher and had an interest in education, got involved with passing the legislation to bring the Community Choice Schools Act to Montana, and happy to be here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Katie?
Hi there, my name's Katie Franklin. I've been a licensed school counselor in LCPC in Montana for over 20 years. I'm a professor at Montana State University. I run the school counseling graduate program, and I'm the director for the Center of Mental Health Research and Recovery. And it's important to say I'm a state employee, and my participation here is as a citizen, not as a representative of Montana State University.
Thank you, Katie. And that goes for all of us. We're all acting as volunteers other than Kathy, who is our team leader and our employee. Okay, Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Forrester Frank. I am from Missoula, and I'm a lifelong educator, mother of 4, mother of an aspiring pilot. Just thought I'd add that since we have a retired pilot on here. So excited to be here and learn more.
John.
I'm John Rutt. I'm from down south central Montana, Laurel, just outside of Billings. Semi-retired business owner, a couple businesses over the years. All of my kids went to public schools, but my grandkids go to our homeschooled and classical conversation type schooling. So I became very interested in this 3-4 years ago, and my wife saw an opportunity that she said, you ought to fill out that application and see if they'll choose you for that commission. And I thought, yeah, right. And here I am. So I was appointed by the superintendent of schools 2.5 years ago.
Thank you, John. And then I'm going to call on you in just a second, Taylor, but I realized that in my chair introduction, I failed to let everyone know that Taylor is with us today, but because we are all volunteers and we're on Zoom so that we can all be here, we agreed that Taylor should have her camera off today just because she's at home and couldn't control the background environment, but she's going to give herself a little introduction here. Thank you, Taylor. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Taylor Ramos. Well, you guys can hear me. Okay. I am a stay-at-home mom. I live in Missoula. I'm not sure what else I should add, but this is Stockton. He's joining us today too. So
thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Okay. Did I forget anyone? No, I think I'm good. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So just to, give you a little bit of detail about us too, we're coming to you from the middle of Michigan. So we use our hand around here to show you where we're at. It's kind of the very middle near Lansing, just outside the capital. Bill's a father of 2, one school age still, and then I'm a father of 4. A couple of them are school age, and a couple of them are before school. So, we've been involved in the education space for some time. It's important to us, and the work that you all are doing is very, very important for the state of Montana. So we're just glad to be here, and thank you for the introductions. On today's agenda, so.
Joe, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you just one second? Are you still sharing your screen? Because my Zoom went back to gallery.
Yes, I am still sharing.
Okay, it's technical difficulties on my side. I'll figure it out. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So the agenda for today, we have kind of an executive summary we'll start with. So, that's going to cover really what the objectives of the work that we are doing with Kathy and with Madam Chair kind of covered to begin with. So what were our objectives, what were our deliverables, and then kind of some of the outcomes in an executive summary format. Then we'll move on to this kind of follows the trail or follows the path that we took to get where we are, even in our work over the last few months. A policy overview, so really focusing on some of the relevant sections and some of the real key words that kind of were highlighted for us as technical experts in assessment. We'll talk a little bit about assessment foundations, and you'll see these kinds of things are the kinds that you'll see all throughout the report as well. So some assessment foundations before we talk about the recommended assessments. and then some of their strengths and weaknesses. We'll talk about also within that kind of before the considerations and implications piece. We'll also talk about the flexibility and autonomy that the law allows for choice schools and some of the materials that we produced for that, and in addition to the recommended assessments. And then we'll move on to some considerations and implications. So, I know you all have had a lot of discussions about policy interpretations. I think I use the word legal in here. Maybe it's more like practical interpretations at this point. And then some data and reporting considerations as you think about these recommended assessments, the other assessments that a choice school may propose, and the implications on things like reporting timelines and validation processes and all of those things that kind of go from where it goes from kind of theory to application. So as we'll start with the executive summary. So the purpose here was, we really got brought on board to identify some assessments that meet the statutory requirements. Along with that, we also developed some tools for the commission to evaluate any proposed assessments. So we see this as, a collaborative approach, even in this application process, or in this, even in this process of communication between you, the commission, the authorizer, and the choice school. And so with that collaborative approach, there's, it makes sense to have a solid set of assessments that are kind of pre-approved and can move through the process smoothly. But then also there's this ability for schools to propose other assessments. And so with these deliverables, we kind of hit both of those components. We have 4 recommended assessments that are approved for use. It's not, or that, we recommend you approve for use. It's not an exhaustive list. It's not all the assessments out there that could possibly become approved based on the statutory requirements, but they're good examples. They're solid tools that we see many people across the country using, or across the state. And then we also provide a practical checklist to help the commission and those evaluating a choice school's application and their assessment recommendations or applications against this practical checklist to help the commission make a decision on whether it's appropriate or not. And then also a decision matrix to help with those discussions and be able to highlight strengths and weaknesses of a proposed assessment. So as we kind of shift over to the policy overview, so the Act establishes a performance-based accountability framework for charter schools in Montana, and it sets clear expectations for components that must be included in a choice school's performance framework. As we were looking at this as assessment experts, one of the key components that we looked at was this point 3A, which is on the right side of this slide, which the contract performance framework must include rigorous, valid, and reliable indicators proposed by a choice school to evaluate its performance that are consistent with the purposes of this part. So as assessment experts, the words that jump out in that section is valid and reliable specifically. Rigorous is a little bit more of a subjective term that, people discuss and have good faith discussions about rigor. Valid and reliable tend to be more technical terms in the assessment space. And so as we were looking and kind of preparing a set of recommended assessments, and as we were looking and creating something like the checklist, we wanted to focus and make sure that we got these two words included in there: validity and reliability. And so what we see there is that schools, have the ability to propose, and as we've continued our discussions, we see that choice schools are likely to propose the measures by which they will be evaluated on an interim basis. So the law, talks about some annual targets, collaboratively developing those, and the commission allows a lot of autonomy. The law allows a lot of autonomy, and the commission ensures those proposals meet those statutory requirements: validity, reliability, and some of the other components we're going to talk about in a second. And those are really the technical standards. So From a technical perspective, we're looking for valid and reliable assessments that also support subgroup comparisons when we talk about the law. So in that first, kind of the very top of the law, that section 1 or subsection 1 of 117, it has all of these performance provisions. The 4 that are really relevant to assessment are the ones highlighted in kind of, prominent on the screen. There's student academic proficiency, student academic growth, achievement gaps across subgroups, and post-secondary readiness. So as the commission continues to evaluate assessments that are proposed by choice schools or adopted by choice schools, these are the kinds of things that in the law are the specific things in the law that need to be able to be present is academic proficiency, academic growth, achievement gaps across subgroups, and post-secondary readiness.
Okay, Joe, really quick, we have a question from Chip.
Sure.
Yeah,
Chip?
I'm sorry. I just want to say I'm not seeing your slides, or are we just looking at the law now?
Nope. Yeah, I should
There's
be
slide.
shared. I'm going to share.
Yeah, you were
again.
sharing. Chip, what
Okay.
I found is on my particular Zoom screen, if I go to the very top, there's a bar and it says webinar or it says Joe Mar's screen. And I had to hit
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And then it puts
Got
the
it.
commission in gallery mode. Did that help?
Thank you very much.
Okay,
That
cool.
did it. I
Awesome.
apologize. Thank
Okay,
you.
Okay, cool.
thanks.
No
'Cause
problem.
I was sitting there thinking, Joe, are we going to be able to get copies of these slides afterwards?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
I think that would be terrific because I love the visual. It's easier to look at this slide than it actually is to look at code, which I have right here
Sure.
next to me. But I like that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. No problem. Yeah, I'd be happy to provide them.
Okay, great.
Joe, I can send those, so no worries. I've got your copy. I'll send it to
Oh, thank you, Kathy.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, I added a couple logos and stuff,
Oh,
Kathy. So I'll send
okay.
you the brand new one. Yep.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. So so again, these kind of 4 components are the 4 relevant assessment components. The additional required components are important, and we're going to kind of talk about those in the considerations and implications at the end, because there's additional required components that must be included, like attendance and recurrent enrollment and financial performance and board governance. And I think that all kind of gets wrapped up into what data stewardship and ownership looks like as a consideration and implication at the end. And so those kind of 4 things are the things we're making sure. So like if we look at it kind of like a funnel, you have validity and reliability at the top of that funnel. And then specifically, we're looking at valid and reliable proficiency and growth. Proficiency being like a student's ability to demonstrate their performance against a set standard, growth being their change over time or between assessments, achievement gaps across subgroups, looking at the performance of the whole to the performance of a subgroup or comparing subgroup performance together, and post-secondary readiness being primarily a high school measure. So in order to discuss assessments specifically, we want to set a good foundation. And so we're going to talk about the assessment foundations that were really foundational for this project. So we have kind of, again, if we look at it almost like a funnel, we have, you tend to have a couple of different types of assessments, criterion referenced or norm referenced. We tried to, in our recommendations, pull assessments that we feel good about that fall in each of these buckets, so that schools also have a choice in that, or at least the commission has an example of approved assessments in each one of these things. So, a criterion reference assessment measures performance against fixed standards and determines mastery or proficiency, where a norm referenced assessment compares performance to a representative peer group. A lot of times, even a criterion referenced assessment will have a normed component to it. And one of my old bosses quite a few years ago used to say something that has stuck with me for quite a few years. And it's that if you scratch a criterion, you'll find a norm. So they're very much related in a way, in that when we talk about what kinds of things a fifth grader should have mastered in mathematics, by the very nature of that discussion about what a fifth grader should know, you're talking about other fifth graders, that norm referenced group. So there's very much an interplay between criterion referenced and norm referenced. When we talk about something like validity, we're looking for evidence that test scores support accurate interpretations for the intended purpose. So this is kind of the very top layer of the discussion about an assessment is there validity? And without validity, there's no reliability. Reliability being consistency, stability, and precision of the test scores across administrations. So when we see that included in the law, those are the kind of things that we're using to define those terms. The alignment piece is the
Joe, I'm going to
correspond.
interrupt you for just a second and
Yes, Madam
just
Chair.
say for the members and attendees who are watching this, kind of the easiest way to think about validity is the test testing what it says it is testing? So it just kind of helps you wrap your head around that. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. The alignment really is the correspondence between the curriculum, standards, the instruction, and the assessment. That we're looking for that in a really good assessment package, as it fits the context of the school, and the choice school is able to articulate the alignment between what they're assessing and what's being taught in the classroom and what's being proposed on the curriculum. Equity and differential item functioning. So this is more of a technical equity and process than it is kind of the more current discussion around equity. But I'd like to kind of define it for you as we talk about this equity and diff. So this equity that we're talking about in this context for an assessment foundation is that assessment companies, as part of kind of an industry standard, should be ensuring that the assessment questions function fairly across demographic subgroups. And so I'll give you an example. So let's say we have like Joe from rural Michigan and Bill from, let's say, inner city New York City. And on an assessment, there's a question about volume of a fertilizer tank. If Joe grew up on a farm, he's going to have a lot more contextual information about that question than somebody like Bill who grew up in New York City. And for that reason, there could be some difference in the probability that Joe and Bill get that question correct. And so those are the types of things that we mean when we say equity in this context is the probability that Joe from rural Michigan and Bill from inner city New York, is the probability the same that they get these questions correct, or is there a difference? And if there's a difference, then companies go through, or assessment vendors go through a process called differential item functioning, where they take these items, these questions, and they submit them back to subject matter experts to try and either reform the language or the story, the context of the item, so that it is more neutral to experience, like rural versus urban. And then they resubmit those questions out for testing to make sure those probabilities are about the same. And so those are very important pieces as we talk about the assessments that we ultimately recommended for the commission. And so we're going to move on to discuss that. And there we go. Now I messed up my Zoom view. So
Take your time.
okay, I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So now we're headed into our recommended assessments. And again, so this list isn't exhaustive of all the assessments that could meet the criteria within the law. But these are assessments that we see, especially the top two that are popular across the country. That, you know, in our experience, we've seen a lot of educators, a lot of school leaders, a lot of authorizers really appreciate the information that comes out of these platforms. So those are kind of the top two. And then the
Really
bottom
quick, I
two.
just want to let the commission
Sure.
members know that in the agenda packet, these are listed on PDF page 97, which is also page 5 of their summary report if you have a printed copy.
Thanks, Trish.
Sure, thank you.
So I'm going to go through all 4 of them, and then I'll share with you the strategy behind picking 2 kind of outside ones, and then 2 that are part of the Montana comprehensive assessment program. So the top one is NWEA map growth. So this is a norm referenced assessment. A lot of people really like NWEA because they have a very strong growth model with conditional growth percentiles. So by conditional growth percentiles, what we mean is that it compares students of like ability and their performance over time. So you can look at things like, you know, a conditional growth percentile would be like how Joe, a 5th grade student who scores at the 60th percentile, so better than 60% of his peers in 5th grade, changes from the fall to the spring. So you can look at that kind of point-to-point comparison. It's norm referenced, so they have a very large sample. I believe it's the largest in the industry, of about 15 million student observations to create their norming study. So when you're talking about a comparison to like a national normed peer group, then NWEA is a very, very just kind of a titan in that space. The next assessment is the iReady diagnostic. So I will say the iReady diagnostic is changing names to iReady Inform in 26-27. They just kind of rolled out that information on their website. And what you'll see too is that those things change over time. Growth models change over time, norms change over time. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But the iReady diagnostic is primarily a criterion referenced assessment, though they do have a growth model and a pretty good one at that. But it provides detailed skill development data. And also one of the big things that we tend to hear people really like about iReady is the stretch growth goals. One of the things with growth that's always, you know, a matter of controversy and discussion is that, you know, if you have a student like Joe, who in 4th grade performs at the 30th percentile, so 70% of his peers are performing higher than he is on the assessment. And Joe continues to grow like a student, so he continues to change between assessments like a student at the 30th percentile, so behind the national average, then he's always going to remain below the benchmark. And so iReady has said, okay, well, let's take the information from the assessment and then let's find places where we can really guide instructional materials to help students grow and grow faster than their peers. And so this is, you know, this has been a discussion and assessment for a number of years now with this concept of necessary growth or adequate growth, meaning how much growth is necessary to get to the standard or to get above the standard. So the third assessment that we have as recommended is the MAST. And I know that's a brand new assessment. And, you know, with brand new assessments, oftentimes there's some challenges in those first few years as well. And so, you know, one of the the reasons we included a couple of the comprehensive assessments within the comprehensive assessment program in Montana is that students are already taking those. And so you can kind of piggyback on that to get some of the information that you need in order to comply with the law and the evaluation without kind of ignoring the assessment that they're already taken. One of the other things that's really great about inclusion of a state assessment is oftentimes state assessments, the state provides some sort of public performance information. And so this gives the ability to compare performance of a choice school with a traditional public school. We'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of MAST, or at least some of the ones that we saw from a more technical perspective on the next slide, along with the other ones. The ACT, kind of the same thing. It's part of the Montana's comprehensive assessment system. It's a measure of college readiness, post-secondary readiness in that sense. There is the ability to have to utilize a growth model with ACT if a student takes a pre-ACT assessment in a grade before 11th grade when it's required for the state. So the conditional growth component is available. As we kind of move over to the next slide to talk about the strengths and limitations of the assessment, then we see that the NWEA map growth, again, strengths, we have a really large national norm sample. People really like the conditional growth model. You know, it's pretty accurate in a sense and stable in a sense because of such a large sample. And they have really, really detailed technical documentation. So they release their technical documentation when the assessments change. They tend to communicate that very effectively. You know, those are some of the technical strengths. Some of the practical strengths is they have a lot of support available for people who choose the NWEA map growth assessments, which is really, really nice. And then they have very specific kind of proctoring detailed information around how to give the assessments. Some of the limitations for NWEA is, you know, it's not directly aligned to Montana standards. It is more of like it's most comfortable in the norms-based bucket. So it's really making comparisons to students across the country. And there's limitations in the grades 9 through 12 growth model, which you see that's pretty common both in assessments like NWEA growth and iReady. Those assessments that aren't college readiness tend to have a harder time tracking growth in math and reading because of the way just kind of the diverse nature of courses and expectations for students in high school. It's not as clear as students in 3 through 8. So you kind of see that often. They're not bad, there's just some limitations. iReady diagnostics / inform, you get really skill focused diagnostics, the stretch growth goals, and then where we've seen a lot of people really, really like iReady is the instructional alignment tools that come with it. It just has the instructional tools with iReady are top notch. Some of the limitations are less public technical documentation, and there is an assessment for high school students, but there's no typical growth there. So, you know, not necessarily one that we'd come out and specifically recommend. Now, if there's a school that comes in and proposes using iReady for high school, then I think that there's a vetting process that would take place with that checklist, and then they would have to come up with some information regarding growth in another way. Now, the MAST, you know, some of the strengths that we saw in our research was, you know, it's a state required assessment. So the strength there is that the kids are already taking it. It's directly aligned to Montana standards. There's strong reliability. In that equity and diff analysis, they have, which is very, very rare. specifically including Native American students, which we know is a large, especially compared to around the rest of the country, a large proportion of students in Montana. So that is a really interesting feature of the MAST. And I think one of the big strengths as you think about the kind of niche schools, niche problem solving schools that you may find as you field applications. Some of the limitations are it's a first year. This was the first year it rolled out statewide. There's a pilot, but the growth model's not yet available. We know that's coming, but it's not yet available. And there's no independent alignment study because it's very, very new as well. We did communicate with some people on the technical end of that and got the technical documentation for it. And we know that those things are likely coming. On the last recommendation, more on the high school end is the ACT and the pre-ACT. So strengths is it's a college readiness measure. It's been around for a long time. They have conditional growth available. It's presupposing that a student takes a pre-ACT assessment before they take the ACT. And there's very, very detailed validity technical documentation. Limitations are it requires multiple administrations for growth, as does every assessment. But in this case, it requires, if you were to use this for growth, it would require an additional administration of a pre-ACT, which I don't think the state requires. And then it's not really aligned to state standards. It's more focused on measuring whether a student is ready for college level math, reading and writing. That might be a good spot if there's any questions about this stuff to
Perfect.
kind of field those through Trish.
Okay, I have a question myself. I'm wondering,
Sure.
looking at the MAST, is it fairly common for each of the states to have their own assessment that's aligned with their standards?
Yes. Yep. That is common. So, in Michigan, we have MSTEP, for example, that is aligned directly to the state standards here. And that is rather common across the country to have it aligned with the state standards. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
are there any states' assessments that are superior to others?
That's a good question. So, superior is a tough one they all have their challenges. So I think one of the challenges, so I read an article, actually Kathy had sent me an article earlier this week in preparation for this about MAST. And the MAST being a through-year assessment. So I believe they assess with the MAST, it's five times in a year. And one of the challenges with like a through-year assessment, and I'll connect this back to your question in a second,
Okay.
Trish. One of those challenges is that if a teacher or a classroom or a school falls behind in kind of the pace of their curriculum, the timing can be thrown off because those through-year assessments are assessing specific things at a certain time. So there's some challenges there. And right now, that's probably a very significant challenge for MAST. But what I will say is that this concept of a through-year assessment has been something that's been rather desirable really in a lot of places across the country. And I haven't seen it, part of it's like, I don't know the context of every state, but part of it
Right.
is that I also realize that there's real challenges with the through-year because it is innovative, the through-year assessment. And so part of how strong or weak something like the MAST becomes is going to be how the adaptations are made to the challenges like that. Now, I think the critiques of a lot of state assessments are very similar. It's, like in Michigan, for example, we see the MSTEP in Michigan tends to have a proficiency cut point that's much higher than the national average on an NWEA normed assessment. So, for example, we see we tend to see that students who meet the proficiency cut points in Michigan on the M-STEP, so kind of the base level proficiency on the state assessment, are typically scoring at like the 60 to 65th percentile on math and reading on the NWEA test. So there's oftentimes a lot of discussion about whether the state standards are too high or too low. Different states. So where I'd say, I think what you're looking for in a state assessment is, is there some adaptive nature of it to it? Do the standards make sense? That sort of thing. So it's hard for me to make a judgment call on like which state assessment is best. The through year assessment, if that becomes, if a lot of that gets ironed out, then I think it will be innovative and probably likely to be a pretty good assessment. But I think that's going to shake out with time.
Right. Okay. I think when I was saying superior, I meant specifically like with validity and reliability.
Oh,
like,
sure.
Are some of them seeing better results?
It's all pretty similar to this,
Okay.
Trish, honestly. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Chip has a question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was also about the mass test. Isn't it, or I know you said you got some of the technical data with it, but with the test being so new, it must be difficult to evaluate it. That's part one. Part two is with iReady, one of the things you said you liked was the fact that you could align instruction to improve growth, I guess would be the way to put it. Is there anything like that with the MAST, or how does it compare is what I'm trying to ask you.
Sure. iReady, I'm a lot more familiar with that alignment and the ability for that to be aligned. State assessments, it's not often that there's like within the same school year the support for the assessment because of its kind of summative nature, meaning that you're taking this throughout the course of the year, but it's really in order to figure out whether a student is meeting the standard or not. So I would not expect that to be the case, that there's as many instructional alignment tools. And I think this really harkens back to the purpose of including something like MAST or the ACT is really, an argument for, some simplicity there in that the students are taking it. They already are taking it because of the federal requirement for testing. So the state selects the test and the students have to take it. And so that's really the inclusion of MAST, not so much the tools associated with it. As far as how is it to evaluate, it certainly is more difficult to evaluate a brand new assessment because there's just not the track record of results to evaluate it against. But what we can see is some of the technical documentation. And that's really why the strengths here reflect some of those technical documentation components, is because in a lot of ways that's the bulk of what we have.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. Thank you.
Okay. Good questions.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Joe, I would just add, I think it's in your report, but one of the interesting things that we had talked about and is noted in the report is that a school may choose to use a combination of these assessments as well. So, potentially MAP for their, I think they have a strong program in like, K to 8, but then 9 to 12, you'd be looking at potentially the ACT. You could also do, some iReady with MAST, or, there's ability to kind of combine some of these assessments too, which, we don't want to overtest, but the idea is that, schools are using that data to inform instruction. And I would say the other piece that we talked about is, the law does allow schools to pick any assessment they like, right? So, and Joe and Bill have provided, a matrix for how the commission can judge those, but, depending on the commission's comfort level, like say a school is designing an assessment specifically to meet their model, it's not been tried or tested. We don't have any valid or reliable measures for that yet. they could be administering one of these assessments side by side so that at least while they're testing that assessment, we would have a valid and reliable measure to look at as we vet out, what could be a new and innovative assessment.
Certainly. Thanks, Kathy. That kind of flows right into what this next slide highlights too. Because, kind of the transition I want to make between the last slide and this slide is I think that the last slide kind of reflects, or it could come off as like a box that we're trying to fit the schools into, or when really the law seems to be after a lot of flexibility. And that's the innovative part of the law here too, is this flexibility that exists for schools. So it really helps to preserve some school autonomy while ensuring quality oversight. And so like Kathy mentioned, it would be commonplace to, we see it in Michigan, we see it in even in the traditional side of using one or multiple assessments for performance evaluations. So schools could certainly combine recommended assessments to cover proficiency, growth, post-secondary readiness requirements. You may have a management company that comes to you to apply to open a choice school, and they might even have their own kind of in-house assessment platform that they've built, and they want to use that for their proficiency or for their growth or for their post-secondary readiness. And you can go through the process, the practical checklist to make sure that it complies with the validity and reliability components, and then look at some of the other important components as well. But there's certainly flexibility there for schools to use one or multiple assessments or to propose alternative assessments. So you'll notice in the report that we didn't just provide like practical checklists, like completed practical checklists for just those 4 assessments. We provided them for 2 other additional assessments as well. One being the SAT and PSAT. That was, we don't know, maybe you end up with a management company that's more comfortable with that, and they like the PSAT and the SAT connection, so maybe they propose that. Well, we provided a completed checklist for that. And then as an example of a more kind of niche focused assessment, we also provided a completed checklist for the ACT Work Keys assessment, which really focuses on job force readiness and buckets and classifies students into categories for the different job types that they may have the skills for at this point. So there's definitely room for schools to propose alternative assessments. And, that's really why we wanted to keep the focus on, okay, there's these 4 that we can recommend as kind of a baseline, and we can provide the documentation for those recommendations. But I think the kind of larger discussion and the more exciting piece is the piece where it's, okay, here are the tools in order to evaluate an assessment to make sure that the school can communicate what they're getting out of the assessment, and that the commission can ensure that the assessment complies with the statutory requirements. And that's what I mean when I say meet statutory requirements, and then the evaluation tools for the commission. A practical checklist, a decision matrix, those can be used to help evaluate any other proposed assessment against those criteria.
Joe, if I could just pause there, I believe
Sure.
Katie Franklin has a question, and I think there she is.
Yep. Thanks. It's a question / statement. So
Sure.
I think that as part of this, especially when we're looking at our high school or our high schools, that it is not just the psychometric properties of these assessments, but also in Montana, high school assessments also qualify high school students for very certain scholarships. Like the PSAT makes them, taking that and the assessment scores of that makes them makes the Presidential Scholarship and the National Merit Scholarship available. And so I think that information is just important for the commission to be aware of, that the assessment tools, they're not only important in terms of assessment, but also for access for Montana students, and making sure that the charter schools the choice schools are aware of that too.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dr. Sullivan.
Okay, we have another
Dr.
question
Franklin. Yes.
from Barbara.
Hi, thanks. I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties, so I'm on my phone right now. I just wanted to make a from the field, the MAST assessment. I hear the qualities that you found, but in the field, we do not find it useful. We do not find it to drive instruction, and I would challenge anyone to find a teacher that's actually using it, or a building that can actually use that data to drive instruction. The reporting is terrible, and the kids don't take it seriously. And as a state, I think we were less than 5% proficient. So I just want to put a caution there that in the field, we are not finding any of that success or any of the things that you had mentioned as being positives for the MAST. So I just want to put that out on the table that in the field, we find that to be a very invaluable assessment for driving students' learning.
Thank you, Barbara. And just to let you know, Kathy and I sort of insisted they include it in this presentation because it is our current state assessment. So only really for that reason. But I think going forward, presuming we have access to the law and this comes into being, if the state switches back to, Smarter Balance, or if they choose some other thing or something, we would likely be sure to include whatever it is the state is using on a recommendation list for applicants. But I hear you. Thank you so much. McCall, I'm wondering if you wanted to chime in at all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really don't have anything to add. I mean,
Okay.
I think that the Board of Public Ed is still trying to gather information from the field, and obviously the board is one that sets statewide assessment. The board has set the ACT. It's been longstanding for our high school students. I don't think there's any question that one will change. I think there's been a lot of questions of what we'll be using for elementary, and I think that is still a question of where we're going to go with that. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that.
Excellent. Well, that's what partnerships are for. Thank you. Okay, Joe.
Okay. Thank you for those questions and observations. So now when we look at the assessment evaluation framework, so this is kind of the practical checklist, falls into these really 7 buckets. Well, a few less because I broke up validity here in a little, but this is kind of a track that it follows is, kind of from top to bottom, we see, does it have face validity and practical significance? So does the assessment clearly state what it measures and align to the evaluator needs? A lot of times that face validity and practical significance, that might be an argument that a choice school makes for a proposed assessment is that they're serving a niche community in this assessment, kind of connects with that niche community and has that face validity. The content validity and the standards alignment. So is the content aligned to Montana standards or relevant academic standards for that particular choice school? Does the assessment provide evidence of validity? So does the vendor provide things like correlations, item analyses, subject matter expert reviews, and fairness evidence? So fairness evidence, including like the diff process in number 6, is often included in the evidence of validity. But in the last recent couple of decades, equity and fairness, the diff piece, the differential item functioning, tends to get its own spot in technical documentation, and so it's labeled at number 6 here. Is there evidence of reliability? So are the reliability coefficients high? In academic work, we tend to think about that as greater than or equal to 0.8 for a reliability coefficient. But you do see some deviation from that 0.8, just kind of when you take things from theory to practice. And do they have well-documented standard error measures and subgroup data? Growth measure quality. Is there a clearly specified longitudinal growth model supporting conditional interpretation? And then we get into the equity and fairness piece. Does the vendor conduct routine equity analysis using diff and revise items when bias is found? And then accessibility. Are accessibility features and accommodations documented, compliant, and monitored? When you go through the policy or the actual assessment checklist, the practical checklist, and you even see some of the examples that we provided, not every single box is going to be checked. And I think it's, the checklist really provides a really detailed set of assurances for an assessment. Not every one of those needs to be checked for an assessment to comply with the statute. But we wanted to give a very comprehensive way to assess an evaluation, and that's also why we went to kind of the decision matrix route, where we have some questions, the ability to highlight some strengths and weaknesses as an assessment is proposed and discussed. But I think the law provides a very, very flexible framework and an innovative framework for schools to be able to propose the assessments by which they're evaluated. And that, I think, is a great transition into some of the considerations and implications. So I know there's been even in that there's been some discussion in our work group over the past few months around who proposes the framework. And I know it sounds like some of you have had discussions about that. And so, I thought it was important we thought it was important to include it in this presentation, where the commission is establishing the overarching performance framework, and choice schools are proposing specific interim measures and assessments they will use to demonstrate progress toward the framework's goals. And so this collaborative process, it takes place during the contracting phase. And then as far as how do we use the data and how do annual targets get set? The choice schools collect the baseline data from fall testing in their first year of operations, and then the commission and school then collaboratively set annual performance targets, leading to those goals in the performance framework by the time of renewal. Does that kind of flow with your discussions, Kathy?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. You can elaborate, Kathy, but I was going to say, this is just earlier in our meeting, we approved to seek legal counsel on a lot of our policies. And this is a perfect example of one that will be looked at. Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, well, I think it's great. This allows for us, we have our standards in the performance framework, but this allows for us to work with schools over the term of their contract to set interim goals or annual goals to meet those performance targets. And I think that's really important because, oftentimes families choose choice schools or charter schools because their child isn't, performing to their expectations or to, where they think they should be. And so kids may come in very low, and, that initial baseline data may be very low for schools, but, the role of the choice school is to close those gaps over time. And so the growth measure from year to year is really the most important measure for choice schools, is that, are we doing something for this child that they weren't getting in the setting that they were before? And I really like this part. I think it's going to be a challenge to manage individual goals for each school, especially as we grow and grow and grow. But I think it's a really great feature of the law.
Great. And I think that one of the kind of advantages to this, and we haven't seen this, and it's been really exciting to be on this side of it too, is because I think that as you kind of digest and seek legal counsel for this type of thing, it gives you the ability to really implement it in a high quality way as schools apply, instead of like trying to apply this new kind of nuance and flexibility to a sector or portfolio of schools of, dozens or maybe even hundreds of schools. I think it would be really difficult to make that adjustment after processes have been built. But I think to know the answer to these questions before you build the processes is going to make, I'm excited for where that takes you all, because it's very, very innovative. Some of the other considerations and implications. So, we're at our core data and assessment and reporting nerds. And so when we were reading the law, some of these things jumped out at us. So, annual reports for all schools. So, this actually gives the commission the ability. So the commission may rely on school submitted data in 4B. That's one of the so I'll go ahead and read 4B. So each authorizer shall annually publish and provide as part of its annual report to the commission a performance report for each school it oversees within the performance framework set forth in the charter contract and 20-11-112. The authorizer may require each choice school it oversees to submit an annual report to assist the authorizer in gathering complete information about each school consistent with the performance framework. So that's one consideration. And then I'll kind of address that consideration further on in the slide. The second consideration is the June 30th reporting deadline in the renewal year. And that's specifically focused on 5B, where it says no later than June 30th of each year, the authorizer shall issue a choice school performance report and charter renewal application guide to any choice school whose charter contract will expire the following year. The performance report must summarize the choice school's performance record to date based on the data required by this part in the charter contract, and must provide notice of any weaknesses or concerns perceived by the authorizer concerning the choice school that may jeopardize renewal if not promptly rectified. The choice school shall respond to the performance report and submit any corrections or clarifications within 90 days. So, kind of two reporting considerations. The implications there, I just want to highlight, would be, there's a tight timeline between testing and that June 30th deadline. So to include the current year information, that's a tight timeline. Spring assessments often extend into late May or even mid-June in some circumstances. And so some solutions to that, or some things to consider, what might be that the commission use prior year data or adopt a two-stage reporting process where you release that and then you release the information as things come out. We've seen that that's a common practice. And I know even, to some of the challenges associated with the MAST as well, is that I believe the data from this last year on MAST came out in November, I believe. So, significant lag time. And so, those are things to consider as you're building processes around the reporting side and expectations around the reporting side. But also kind of over all of that is a little bit of a question, or maybe it's not a little question, but a big question of data ownership and access. So in our experience, we see that schools often own the assessment data, in that maybe an authorizer would come through with a data sharing agreement or an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, built into the charter contract to ensure timely commission access to those data. Some of that, is a decision that has to be made on the commission's behalf, or on the commission's part, to on whether or not you're going to have ownership or have those data sharing agreements and MOUs. But we also wanted to point out if you don't have, it's always nice to have multiple reference points, especially for the validation of information used for even like high stakes decisions like a charter renewal. And so to rely purely on the school to submit their performance information puts things in a place where the school's providing the actual data and the results that are going to be used to evaluate it. Whereas if there was a data sharing agreement, then it would allow you all to use raw data to verify the information the school's also producing, and the school can then verify the information that you're producing. And so there's a nice back and forth that exists in that environment when both parties can kind of you know check and verify for each other. So that's part of the next step to the next steps that we'd recommend as well. So, to decide on some of that data ownership and control. And this relates back to, I said we would come back to those required provisions from that subsection 1 in the law, where there's attendance, recurrent enrollment from year to year being the two big ones associated with. So that's individual student attendance data, or I suppose it could be statewide kind of chronic absenteeism, but there has to be an attendance component. It'd be tough to do an attendance component without any agreement about how to access that data or verify the accuracy of that data from a school, and also the recurrent enrollment from year to year. So you'd have to know likely the student's enrollment date at the school. And so I think those are important considerations just as you build out processes and really field applications and that sort of thing. The second piece there is establishing verification and administration processes. So creating processes for accuracy verification of school submitted analyses, defining expectations for things like participation rates on an assessment, and just the way assessments are proctored and administered at a school are good things to consider at this point. And then maybe even consideration of periodic audits or validation checks for school produced reports. Those are kind of some common practices that we see. And then the seeking legal clarification, it sounds like that's where you're headed is, there's this component of subsection 2, which says that each choice school in conjunction with its authorizers shall set annual performance targets designed to help each school meet applicable federal, state, and authorizer expectations. And that 3A component where it actually says that the contract performance framework must include rigorous, valid, and reliable indicators proposed by a choice school to evaluate its performance that are consistent with the purposes of this part. There's maybe a little bit of gray area that could, legal clarification could help. So to kind of summarize where we've gone in this work is, 4 assessments recommended for approval: NWEA MAP, the iReady diagnostic/inform, MAST, and ACT pre-ACT. We've created a practical checklist that you all can work through when somebody proposes a different assessment, as well as a decision matrix to help assess those checklists. The schools retain the flexibility to propose assessments, and the commission ensures that they're compliant. Some key next steps around data ownership decisions, data sharing agreement, development or MOU development, some legal clarifications. Overall, the assessment system has to support valid, reliable measures of proficiency, growth, and then subgroup equity. I'd love to take any more questions and discussion.
I am just scrolling through the
Sure. I hit stop share so I could see you all, if that's okay.
Perfect. Yes, that is excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
So just to let the commission know kind of what Kathy and I have been talking about in the executive committee is that these recommendations that are being presented to us today, we want each member to have time to really go back and review the report that Solomon provided for us today, now that we've had this presentation, and that in April, when we meet again, one of the agenda items will be the discussion about the various recommendations that Solomon has made and whether or not we should go forward with those. So we're not making any decisions today. We're just kind of presenting it so that we have time to think about it. as far as questions to your presentation, I had one. And, this is kind of specifically in consideration of the challenges with measuring proficiency and growth at a high school level and making sure that we are compliant with what's in the law. I mean, do you guys suggest that there should maybe be some clarification put into the law for the reality that this is a difficult thing to do? Or do you think just kind of doing our best like we are right here and like the state does? I mean, because they give the ACT also, you know what I mean? Like that's probably sufficient.
So clarification's always better. So if there's the potential for that to be clarified, I think that's good. I also think so, like, as far as like valid and reliable growth, so it's technical, but it's also a big kind of term. And so, or a broad term in a sense, because growth can be a number of different things. I think that, it would be harder. I think it's harder to make the argument for validity and reliability if it's a very kind of bespoke assessment that's proposed by a school for that 9 through 12 segment. I think that's harder to make an argument than it is to make the argument that we're going to use pre-ACT to ACT or PSAT to SAT, or even like change up or down the scale on ACT work keys. I think so I think it's a matter of good faith effort in that sense too, would probably be how I would interpret that. But again, I think the clarification is probably a good thing to seek in that sense. Yeah, so the high school growth the high school growth metric, we went through a process back in my previous role, and we worked for the Center of Assessment and Innovation, which I believe from looking at the MAST documentation is also who is involved in MAST to some level as well. And there's this concept around growth. So one of the people there has been instrumental in just growth development and research across the country. Dr. Betta Benner is his name. And there's this concept of like growth to nowhere, which is pretty common discussion point in high school, because by the time a student gets to the growth component is you would like to see eventually that students are growing to a point where they're meeting expectations, whatever that is, whether it's the state standards, whether it's the standards within the school. And so it creates, I mean, there's a hard stop in high school, right? It's only 4 years, it's 12th grade and things are done. And so growth in high school is just a difficult conversation even nationally, about what growth in high school means, what's enough growth in high school, that sort of thing. So for that to be a part of this discussion is not surprising in a sense because it's difficult. Bill, would you like to add anything else there?
Yeah, the one thing I would focus on a little bit from just a real practical standpoint is, Joe alluded to this, when we think about high school measures like SATs, college and career readiness, or ACTs kind of equivalent, those are set proficiency standards of where we want all of our high schoolers to get to, right? When we think about growth, we've talked about higher achievers and lower achievers. We talked a lot about this with Kathy and Trish as we worked through this process. A lot of times when we're talking about growth, we're really focused on our students who are not quite up to that level yet. And we have a lot of them, right? And so I think that's where all the things that Joe's mentioned about like pre-SAT or the PSAT to SAT ladder is really useful because you find out where students who are not quite at that level yet, where they could get some help and move up. So if I were, what I really think about growth in high schools, I'm thinking about students who are not yet on that proficiency track. How do we get them there? And that's what I want to see in assessments. Do you give me information that I can help that student get to that point? In Michigan, we're on the PSAT track. We have PSAT 8 all the way through the SAT every year. And that's a state requirement. And so schools will use that information to try and help those students. That's what I would maybe focus on that. I don't know from a clarity standpoint on the legal part. That's Joe's, really the expert here between the two of us on that. I'm just the guy who's like, I want to see that info.
And yeah, Madam Chair, I will add that Bill and Joe provided us some metrics in the performance framework for both growth and proficiency, and did note in there for students who are below the below expectations, they would have a different growth target than those that have already achieved the target. And I will also add, as we actually get into this stuff, we may want to reach back out to Joe and Bill as experts in this, because it is kind of hard to track that growth piece, I think. But
I was thinking that too. That makes sense.
yeah.
Does
And I
anyone
think
else?
too,
Go ahead,
okay,
Joe.
so I wanted to, because I didn't want Member Forrester Frank to feel like I sidestepped her comments about the mass too, because I do think that that's very important as well. And we do see that that is a very common even frustration for state assessments in general, is that there's very, very few state assessments that we've come across that provide relevant information for like classroom instruction, especially within that year. And so I just wanted to recognize that Member Forrester Frank brought that up, and that we wouldn't consider that a strength of the MAST for sure. And we don't see that as a strength of a lot of state assessments. The inclusion of something like MAST and ACT or pre-ACT is really more about a decision to not exclude it than it is a decision to include it as the definitive performance framework, because students are already taking the assessment.
Right. Perfect. Does anyone else have any questions? How about any attendees or from the public?
Madam Chair, I do actually see Chip's hand up before you move to the public.
Hey, Chip. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry about that. It sounds like what you're saying in high school to measure growth, there aren't that many options other than pre-SAT, SAT, and pre-ACT and ACT. Is that a fair statement or not?
So that's a great observation. And I think it's also dependent on the type of school too. So in the niche that the school's serving. So there's the ACT Work Keys assessment that really focuses on, like workforce readiness component. And so there's that as well. Even assessments like NWEA has a 9 through 12 component. So there is an achievement and growth component. And I think that it's still worthy of the argument that it's valid and reliable. They have the model component. It's just high school growth by its very nature is difficult to measure, partially because students choose very differentiated tracks once they get to high school too. You know what I mean? So there's you might have students taking advanced calculus or AP calculus, and also students taking pre-algebra. And so there's there's a wide variance, and it makes it a lot more difficult than the kind of bread and butter 3 through 8 kind of track forward. And you see it reflected in really the standards associated with assessments as well. So they're out there, Member Linden Lobb. We provided some technical documentation, and included in that technical documentation for like NWEA is discussions about that. I think for me, if I were evaluating an application, I would be evaluating, or I would really be kind of honed in on what the connection between what the choice school is trying to do for their students and what the assessment is measuring for those students as kind of the North Star for how to select a high school assessment. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay. Good question.
Looks like we have an attendee who has a question. Todd Hanson.
Cool.
Welcome. Hi, Todd. You can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I just had a quick question. A great conversation today. Appreciate the opportunity to sit in and to listen to the presentation. My question is there any flexibility or latitude in the application of what you're talking about today for a potential program of study that is K-8 versus K-12 and does not lead to termination in a K-8 diploma, but is structured around more closely to what are the state statutory requirements as to age limits upon which you no longer have to attend a public school? You could go into a particular internship or training program after the age of 16 that is not actually part of a recognized high school program or diploma granting process, but instead you're moving students through 8th grade content and then transitioning them into other work-based or fields of study or apprenticeships or internships. Is the work that's being done by the commission and what we heard today in the analysis that was provided, is there flexibility in that being applicable to what others might be envisioning?
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. That is an excellent question. So I think first, I hope I get all the parts of this. So Kathy, feel free to chime in, and Chip too, because you know the law, but anyone can, to add to this. But the first part is that we presume that in the application process, when governing boards are coming to us, they're going to be requesting what they want for their school. There's so much flexibility in the law that if you wanted to have a K-3 school and that's it, that's what you're offering, that would be the application. You might be a K-5 school, or you might be a 3-8 school, or you might be a K-12, or just a 6-12 or 9-12. I mean, we're presuming we're going to see a mixed bag there, and we will have to consider each application as it comes in as the proposal is specifying. And the idea is, because there is so much flexibility in the law, that as long as the commission is compliant with what's in the law, the policies could always expand or contract as necessary in order to better clarify if we come into some kind of conflict with a particular application or something. But and everything would be done in public meeting, in deliberating and voting for the commission, just like we brought up earlier. Like, what if there's a hearing and we have to close the school? Like, that's going to be done in the public eye and people will be able to participate. So to answer your question kind of about that flexibility of high school, like if an application comes in, that's for like you said, in compliance with compulsory attendance laws, and there's a high school that's only going through age 16, we would have to take that into consideration, because maybe it's not going to result in a diploma, or perhaps it is going to result in a diploma that's happening at an accelerated rate. So each application would be evaluated individually on its merits. Does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would add to that. And Mr. Hanson, thank you for the question. That statute does allow for the governing board of the choice school to set their graduation requirements.
Great. Great to hear that flexibility is not only in statute, but is part of the scope of analysis that is being contemplated by the commission when in anticipation of the kinds of applications that you're likely going to get. School districts and related communities who have found themselves on the outside of the other mechanism that exists, I think are acutely interested in what's going on with this commission and the opportunities that it may present for alternative approaches.
Thank you so much. I mean, that is, again, going back to our core values that we approved last time and that we have published on the Board of Public Education, that intentionally diverse really is our value. We want to make sure that we are creating policies and that will help regulate this so that it doesn't go off the rails, but at the same time offers communities something very specific to them that is different. And ideally, this would be a pathway for them. Okay, anyone else? Okay, you guys, well, thank you so much. Joe and Bill, do you guys have any kind of closing remarks that you'd like to make for us?
Just thank you for the opportunity to work together. It's been very collaborative and productive, and thank you for the opportunity to come and present to you today. Email, call, let us know what you need.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, team. So looking at the agenda, we had a break scheduled at 10:45, but since it's 10:28, I think we should take our break right now and reconvene at 10:45. Does anyone have any concerns with that or something they want to comment about it? We good? Okay, everyone have a nice coffee break. See you at 10:45.
All right.
Thanks.